I have always been very interested in creating and building things, and was very fortunate to get my first job out of college working at Walt Disney Imagineering, which is the place where the Disney theme parks are designed and built and architected. And I didn't realize it at the time, but to build a Disney theme park is not only something that's very, it's entertaining, it's fun, it's show business, but it's highly technical from a architecture, design, planning perspective. It's a lot of engineering, it's a lot of programming. And in a 3-year period, I learned an incredible amount about putting together a project, which was Epcot Center. I was on the original team that built Epcot Center back in the late 70s and early 80s. And that sort of set me up on a quest, a 30-plus year quest of just going and looking for really interesting things to do, projects to work on, companies to work for. Very fortunate to have spent about 17 years in entertainment with Disney and with Sony, and then about 15 years ago, decided to make the shift into technology and move from a B2C, business to consumer company, which is what Disney and Sony were, to a B2B, business to business company, NAVTEQ, and learned a lot about data and mapping and technology. Rivet really combines that entire experience set. If you think about the entertainment quality of Rivet, the information, the quality of production, the sound of it, so much of that comes from the Disney, Sony side. But if you look at what's underneath the hood, the technology, the way we set up the audio, the data, the algorithms, all that comes from NAVTEQ. So for me, Rivet really is a combination of what I've been doing for the last 30 plus years.
The project previous to Rivet, what's the most important aspect? Is it got to do with how these smartphones locate people, or is it something else?
Well, so I spent about 11 years with NAVTEQ, and NAVTEQ creates the maps for car navigation, creates the traffic data to enable dynamic routing for navigation. And there is really a very direct parallel between NAVTEQ and Rivet, and that has to do with how we treat audio and how we treated the map. So let me go back to NAVTEQ for a second. NAVTEQ was the global winner in mapping for car navigation. We didn't actually create a map as you know it, a visual map. We created map data that then could be rendered in any different way. It could be rendered as part of a route. It could be rendered as part of an audio set of instructions. And the company made this map data with a very rigorous data format that allowed it to ultimately be played, delivered to 100 million people every day, whether it was on the internet, through Yahoo, or through a Garmin navigation device. Our approach to Rivet is the same in that we have set up every piece of audio as a discrete data file with not only the audio data, but then all of the metadata associated with it, so that when we publish a story, it can play on Rivet, but we can also have it played in other applications. And we don't have to do anything. All that has to happen is that application will call our data from the cloud and play it. So in a way, you will begin to hear Rivet not only on smartphones and in cars, but next month we'll have Rivet playing on conference calling when you're on hold. And you'll hear Rivet when you're in the elevators probably sometime next year, where people want to hear fresh news. And because of this data approach for audio, it makes it really ubiquitous in terms of how we can deliver it to any device, to anything really.
And I wanted to ask you about audio in a city like Chicago, where people are by nature commuters. This is a format that works well, right? If you're on the train, if you're on an elevator, you can be doing something and hearing audio?
Yes.
So what have been the challenges, if any, with that in your first year of going operational?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is that is creating new everyday behaviors for consumers. While yes, many people listen to audio throughout the day, whether it's on the radio, satellite radio, hearing, songs from your iPhone, listening to news from a smartphone is not an existing behavior. And so there's a lot of education we have to do. There's a lot of marketing and getting people to try the app. And then even when they've tried the app and used the app, and unless it can be part of their everyday routine, what we find is that one of our biggest challenges is getting them to come back to listen every day and to really have it set up as a routine. An example was my sister, who of course likes the app, uses the app. I hope she does. She's my sister. But she said, John, I've really been trying to find a way to use this every day, but I can't seem to find the right action or routine. And so I said, oh, okay, well, I mean, because she doesn't really commute. She works at a university just a mile away from her home. And she said, I got to go to the gym. I said, well, Charlotte, have you tried using Rivet while you're working out in the gym? She said, no. So she tried it. She loved it. So now she found a new routine. But it's just hard to get people to that level. And so one of the biggest challenges we have is how do we make it accessible where you will use it every day, such as in a car.
Question.
Yes. So with the launch of the news app, have you utilized social media to basically promote the app? And if so, what has been your success?
Yes, we have. When we launched, we had very limited social media capabilities. About 2 months ago, we enhanced it so that now, when you hit the social media icon on the navigation strip, you can share via Twitter, via Facebook. You can email, and what it does is it actually emails that story to you. So it's pretty basic kind of sharing. I would say our success has been moderate, but sort of expected given where we are, because there's a lot more we need to do with social media. Particularly, we need to implement push alerts. We think that the push alerts will probably be one of our most powerful ways to say, hey, this story is just breaking. Listen to it, touch this and listen to it on Rivet and get you back in the app. And so we have not yet implemented the push alerts, and because it's a little more complicated to set it up, but that will happen later this year. I think one of the biggest challenges we have with social media and Rivet is that we're an audio app and social media is mostly visual. And so we might push a story to you, but if you're not really let's say via Twitter, if you're not really in a listening mode, you probably aren't going to listen to it at that time. And so we've had some success with listening, but I think we have a lot to learn, with audio. And audio, there really has yet to be any audio app that's gone viral. And part of it is because audio is hard to create and to distribute. That being said, we're pretty confident that we'll find ways to make it work.
Thank you.
What role have the data from social media played in you making judgments and assessments about what to do next? So are you using social measurement tools to see what happens with individual stories?
Well, so we're using, let me sort of break that up, deconstruct that a second. We have very good tools to track and monitor usage. So we know, for example, how for everybody who has a session on Rivet, we know how long they listen, we know which stories they listen to, we know which ones they skip, which ones they share, which ones they like. So we're gathering all of that data. I would say our data is probably ahead of our analytics. But right now we're just building a lot of data based on usage, and that's part of our core set of tools that we have for Rivet. From a social media analytics, if you look at the weight of usage of Rivet, it's predominantly in the app, so we don't have as much usage outside of the app at this point. So we haven't spent as much time analyzing the social media analytics. That being said, we know it will become increasingly important, particularly as we start doing more of it through push alerts and things like that.
So more of within the app itself, that data than the impact of tweeting out a particular story on Twitter?
Yes, because again, the weight of the consumer experience today is within the app. We'd like to change that. We'd like to get more of it being delivered through social media. And I would say that our social media strategy is still at a very early stage. And, we're thinking about things like, like today we have a Twitter account. Should we have multiple or more specialized Twitter accounts? For example, have a Rivet Sports or Rivet Business, similar to what, BuzzFeed does, where they sort of specialize their stuff. But we're not big enough to both have the infrastructure to support that, and we don't have the user base to get that granular. I hope we get to that level.
You mentioned earlier that no audio app has gone viral yet. One of the folks that I talked to earlier was Tribune Media's Newsbeat, which is trying to use computers to read news copy, text-to-speech kind of.
Right.
What's your take on technology versus you have humans reading the news?
So we started this with actually the Dallas Morning News 2.5 years ago, and the original idea was to do text-to-speech. And I met with all of the top firms. I flew out, went to Nuance's research lab. I talked to the people all around the world who do text-to-speech. And they told me, and frankly, as I listened to it, I have to agree that it's not very good at storytelling. It's just not. It's fatiguing to hear text-to-speech stories, and they felt they were a couple years away from getting something that was good. But even that was somewhat optimistic. It's a hard problem. It's a really hard problem, and frankly, part of it has to do with the voice quality. Part of it has to do with the scripts. If you just read a newspaper story, when we get a story, we write an audio script. So even if we had automated that, we would still create an audio script, because the way you talk is different than the way you read. And so we have for stories, we've gone to live voices, and because we think it's more engaging. We want people listening 30 minutes a day. I don't think you can listen to Newsbeat for more than a minute or two. At least I can't. Now, that being said, text-to-speech is part of our roadmap for highly data-intensive, personalized stuff. I'll give you an example. We're going to launch a weather product in about 100 cities where we will get voiced weather in the major metropolitan areas, and we'll be able to geolocate it in the cities. But there's a lot of weather data out there in areas where we're not going to get voice stuff. We're going to create text-to-speech versions of that so that from a utility perspective, you can get it. We also will do something similar with highly localized traffic information. Having run NAVTEQ's traffic business and experimented with it here in Chicago, we know we can deliver hyper-local traffic information. We have the technology, but it's far too expensive to voice that. And so what we would do is basically come up with templates where the data gets fed in and fed out through a text-to-speech engine. We also will do this with stock reports, sports scores, but things that are heavily data-centric, where people would be willing to get their personalized information at a lesser quality in order to get the freshest, most accurate stuff. We believe that's a good use of text-to-speech. We don't believe telling stories is going to be there for the foreseeable future.
Our students here are learning about social media and measurement. 5 years from now, where do you think they will need to be at the cutting edge of what's coming?
Well, I'm going to answer that more qualitatively. If you had asked me, if you had said to me 20 years ago that I'd be leading an internet radio news company, I would have said you're crazy. I mean, first of all, I don't even know what the internet is. I'm not a technical guy, although I'm not technically trained, but I'm very technically, I can understand it and I can learn about it. And, what I have done is basically learned what I needed to learn, in my job. I didn't know how to do a project plan and schedule, but I then took a night course to go and do project planning and scheduling. I didn't know how to build map data, but I went and spent time with our map data folks to learn how to do it. And to the point where I could be comfortable in whatever new technology, whatever new media is coming along. So I would say the most important thing is more of the process of just making sure you're always learning and trying to connect the dots and not getting, stressed out about or intimidated. Don't be intimidated by anybody who knows something or you think they know something. They probably don't. Yeah, I would say just keep learning and keep putting, if you have a weakness in an area, go and learn about it. If there's something you're really interested in, go and follow it. Everybody talks about coding. You got to code. You got to know how to code. Well, the reality is you have to understand how it works. You have to understand how the algorithms work, how the data works. You don't necessarily need to know how to do these things specifically, but you have to understand the basic concepts of how they work, and then you have to know where to look to find the answers. And so I think it's more of a qualitative thing. I don't know, 5 years from now, I have no idea.
Alex, did you have a question about news that you want to ask? You were talking about news earlier. Well, come on up and ask something about news, because you had a good question about it. Well, you said about tell him about your site and what you've been doing in the pivot and kind of what that teaches you.
Okay, so I'm a new media entrepreneur. The way my company had started off doing technology news, and being in the Midwest didn't really help, so I had to kind of pivot a couple times. So, you guys are doing news. How did you go around necessarily not having to hire people to create that news necessarily? Am I wording that right?
Well, we have a newsroom. So, I mean, we actually have 4 recording booths, and we have a newsroom. So the sort of core, like when you fire up the app, the Welcome to Rivet, a lot of those stories are coming from our newsroom. And so we have access to news feeds. The Associated Press is an investor. We have access to a lot of news feeds coming in through our news tool, which is called News Boss. And then we basically write and produce much of the news that you hear on Rivet from our newsroom. But we also are increasingly interested in sourcing news, audio news from others who are producing, and then us being able to deliver it through through our app.
Okay.
So ask your question again.
So, like, for me, it's like I'm the only one that's doing the news on the site right now. So, from a scalability perspective, it's not very scalable. So I was kind of wondering how you guys did that.
Right. Well, I mean, we're a much bigger operation, I mean, we have right now there's probably 10 people in our newsroom. And we have shifts that start at 4 in the morning and they go to 10 at night. So we run multiple shifts throughout the day. So we're operating much like a regular news organization, operating business. So yeah, it's a much different scale. Now that being said, there's a technology side to what we're doing, and what I hope to do is to not grow the internal newsroom, but to really go and source news from others, and to find a way to make our news content creation much more scalable. And one of the ways we're going to do this is by basically opening up our publishing platform and allowing people to basically online sign up, contribute, and then we will perform some level of quality assurance and then basically make it available for others to hear. And that we hope helps with the scalability of our content. But it's very onerous. So
not unlike a blog site, but for audio. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, exactly. Audio blogging is one of the phrases that we've used. Yeah.
So essentially, you're just going to make a template for people to insert their content, and then just quality controlled by you. Quality control, fact check.
Yes, and then it's a little. Then it goes a little beyond that. In that, then you have to think about, well, how does a consumer or a listener access the content? And it's one thing if it's only available to people who are specifically following your content. It's another thing if we're going to push it out to our general listeners. And so one of the things we're debating on this blogging is how far, how open is open? Do we make it? And that you'll see more of over the next probably 12 months. We're not doing it today, but it's one of the things that we're thinking about as we evolve our roadmap.
I guess. Sorry, I have one more question.
Go for it.
How many times did you have to, you had your initial business idea. How many times did you have to pivot until you got to where you are now?
So I started working on this in 2011. And this was when Pandora had just gone public. They were, and I downloaded Pandora. And with the work I'd done at NAVTEQ, I kind of looked at Pandora and I realized how transformative internet radio will be for audio listening, particularly when it gets into the car. So the big aha for me was, this is a really big opportunity. This is a really big industry that's going to completely change. Radio stations are going to be in my opinion, gone in 5 years. Satellite radio, as it's currently structured, one-way distribution through satellite is gone within 5 years. So I saw it as this huge opportunity that was going to change not only how people consumed audio, but how it was going to be created. And my first business plan was Pandora on steroids. And I worked on that for a while, and people basically told me I was trying to boil the ocean and that it was just far too ambitious. There were too many problems you were trying to solve. So that was pivot number one. So I said, okay, I won't do music. And by the way, music's a really tough business model in internet radio because of the licensing costs. So then pivot number one was to say, okay, let's specialize on news and information. And I worked on that for about 5 months. And then frankly, I put the whole business on pause. I would say I shut it down, but I put it on pause for about 4 or 5 months and was basically walked away from it. And then in October of 2012, a guy who had been the head of IDEO, which is a big design firm in California, but he was the head of the IDEO firm in Chicago, heard what I was thinking about and just said, you got to go do it. And so I restarted it a third time. And this time we really focused it in on what has become a Rivet. And that was 1.5 years ago. And I would say now our pivots we're still adjusting, but it's pretty consistent with the vision and the plan that we put together about 1 year ago.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Hi, John. With your news team, do you consider them to be more like reporters where they report the news that comes in on the feeds, or are they like journalists where they choose a beat and then take a different...
So, you know, they're more, because we're small and there's a lot of categories that we're covering, they're more like reporters, and they're versatile.
Okay.
And so if you listen, you'll hear a lot of the same voices. You know, James Van Osdale will do an intro, he'll do a business update, and then he'll do his 1 song per day, you know, for music. And because of the way we produce it, so James and Rob and Julia and others are more on air, and behind the scenes we have people producing, you know. So if you think about the process, we have a newsroom manager who decides what stories we're going to do. He or she passes it over to the producers who pull together, write the script, put all the metadata together to make sure that once we post it on the cloud, it gets properly distributed. And then we have our on-air talent record the story, and then the producers do the sort of finishing touches, QA, and then put it out. That's the way it's done today. I think with success and with with a larger team, I'd like to have more, call it beats or whatever. I'd like to have some real business experts, some real sports experts. But for now, we're just trying to kind of do the basics.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have a question?
Sure.
I had one more, John, before we let you get away, which is when I first met you last fall, you were just about to launch,
right.
And you said something that I thought was fairly profound, and I've been thinking about ever since, and I wanted to come back to it, which is you said, you know, you were in the midst of making a lot of important decisions, and that it was important to make those because once you became operational, it's harder because you're trying to feed this 24-hour news beast, right? So how has that played out in the last year?
True. It's once you get operational, it is much harder to spend the quality time innovating and thinking of new stuff. I would say that the first 6 months when you met us, we were completely in product phase. Everything was possible, and we could put a lot of stuff out there on paper, and of course you end up building a smaller version of the bigger vision, but you always think you're going to have the time to then go and do your roadmap. And what happened was, so when we launched in December, the idea was we would go from iPhone to Android early in 2014. Well, what happened was we basically realized that we had underestimated the difficulty in building an audience. And that before we moved to a new platform, which is expensive, we better figure out if we can actually build audience on iPhone. And so, you know, the earlier question about a pivot, that was a big pivot. So we basically said, defer iPhone, defer Android, because we've got to figure out how to market this thing. And that led to us learning a lot about marketing and getting downloads, social media. So all of the social media stuff that we implemented over the past couple of months and the marketing that we did was really in lieu of our original plan, which was go straight to Android. Now, where are we today? Well, today we've kind of figured out how to build audience. We've got some real business now and some real customers. Now, in order for us to get to the next big level, we've got to have an Android app. So now Android will come out in probably September of this year. But you do spend a lot more of your time just thinking of the day-to-day stuff, and it is much harder to plan when you and to do programs and new projects when you've got the day-to-day stuff you're dealing with.
And you're convinced going forward, as we see this disruption that you talked about in radio, satellite, that going forward with younger audiences, that there will be an appetite for news and information?
Well, I think the answer is yes, and it's likely to be different than what we're delivering today. Because I think that, we're delivering this news and information that in some ways sounds like radio news today. I think that the future of this is going to be much more community-based creation and delivery of stuff. So it becomes more personal and social. But again, with audio, it's hard to do. But I think if you look at how people consume news and information, and if audio, and I believe audio will remain one of the ways people do that, particularly when they're driving or commuting or doing other things. There is a need to have a narrative spoken word kind of experience. And so, yeah, I continue to think it's a very big opportunity. I think the world you guys are coming into is a world in which it's going to be a series of iterative opportunities, and there is no final solution or final answer. Everything is, in essence, and becomes an interim opportunity. And one of the big challenges is figuring out when to start something, when to join something, and also when to leave it to go do something else. I think adaptability is going to be one of the key requirements for people being successful in business or whatever field journalism or whatever field you're doing, because everything is changing so fast, and you just got to figure out when is the right time to do it. I think I was a little early 3 years ago on internet radio. I think now is the right time. I think 3 years from now, it would be too late to enter in, because I do think the desk chairs are being set now. So I feel like we're at the right time to be doing this. So I'm excited about it. But it's just, you just got to keep your eyes open on the opportunities. So that would be my only sort of final thought.